I'm Dave.
And I'm Andrew, and we are the IB English guys. And today we would like to present a piece of writing about a poem that we deconstructed in our last video. Of course, our last video we looked at the Tyre Shop by Bob Orr and spent about 15 minutes talking about that. Today, however, we would like to spend our time with you doing the following. First, we would like to have a discussion about some key aspects of the rubric. Second, we would like to go ahead and present a student answer for you. And thirdly, we will discuss why we believe this paper scores 7.
Okay, so first we want to take a look a little bit at some of the wording of the criteria so we understand paper 1 for literature and some of the language that's used to describe the different criteria. When we look at understanding and interpretation, there's a few keywords that we want to highlight. Convincing and insightful interpretation of the implications and subtleties. Okay, we've got a lot of words here to unpack and talk about.
Yeah, for me, Mr. Giles, when you're talking about implications, larger implications and subtleties of the text, I think you're looking at the so what. I think you're taking authorial choices and you're thinking about so what? Why do they matter and what are the effects or implications?
That's right. Reading between the lines. We also want to remember that we want to make references to the text. We want to be in the text and extracting small nuggets, small pieces of language from the text and put that in our writing. Now let's move to criteria B, which is interpretation and evaluation.
Yeah, and of course when you're doing in criterion B, we're looking for insightful and convincing analysis of authorial choices. This is time to flex your literary terminology, explain how you unpack metaphors, tell what A compared to B represents, and really dig in and break down these key poetic features.
This is the films of spec films. This is where we're going to really talk about all those different techniques that are used and really have that insightful and analysis of the effect on the reader. Criteria C, is organization and focus. This word focus is new.
Yeah, I think focus is essential. You want to look at those guiding questions. Think about what are the key words, what are some synonyms of those key words, and then load your paper up with those words and show that you are focused and unified throughout each and every paragraph.
Yeah, and you're focusing on the wording of the guiding question. That guiding question is taking you to the promised land.
Exactly.
Then language is our last one we want to think about. Carefully precise, well-chosen words and vocabulary and good sentence structure and just a sense of fluency. And again, this is part of that register in language.
Yeah, and lastly, think about even including some persuasive language. You're making an argument, so be persuasive with your argument. Convince your examiner that you know the right answer.
Yeah, we got another video coming about how to put voice in your writing, in academic writing. That's going to be a good one. Okay, we're going to take a look at a piece of writing now, and this piece of writing, we love this, is a paper 1 literature response to the poem called The Tyre Shop, and it's by Bob Orr. And we love this poem. We did a full video describing, discussing, and deconstructing this poem using our acronym spec film.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Giles. I'd recommend if you haven't read this poem, please pause the video right now and go back and read that poem. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to extract any insight or meaning from this video.
Yeah, so this particular writer he responded to the guiding question that says, how does the poet use imagery and figurative language to convey the relationship between the speaker and the tire shop man? So this again is our guiding question. We want to think on that formal and technical element of imagery and figurative language, and also thinking about that relationship between the speaker and the tire shop man.
Yeah, one thing to note for lit students and lang lit students, remember, this is not the old commentary. You have been given a guiding question. They are specifically asking about figurative language and imagery. They are not asking for a comprehensive overview of the entire poem. Focus on the key words of the guiding question.
Yeah, and this particular piece of writing is too long for us to go through in its entirety. We're going to look at a few select paragraphs. Notice that the writer has a rudimentary outline that's displayed here. We see an introduction. We see them talking about the extended metaphor in the title. Then we see this idea of the motif of writing. Then we shift to this tire shop man because that again is our guiding question, how he behaves, the relationship between tires and words. And then finally, that big inspiration that we talked about, and that's how he's going to then finish off his poem with his writing with the conclusion.
Yeah, and folks, please notice that this is not a 5-paragraph essay. This is a complex poem, and that 5 paragraphs simply won't suffice. So we need to expand our insight, expand our depth and analysis.
Okay, so let's go now to the introduction. And I want just to look at his introduction and for us to think a little bit about what the writer is doing in the introduction. And I think like the first thing that jumps into my mind is that the writer is showing a really good understanding and a connection to what the poem is all about. thinking about his affinity for the tire shop man, his connection. Again, that's the guiding question. That's pretty smart. I like that.
And as you progress through the paragraph, as we get further to the end of the introduction, we can see those words imagery and figurative language highlighted in gray. That's really important for our criterion C. It establishes that you're focused and you've understood the guiding question, and that's the writer's done a very good job by capturing these elements.
Yeah, I like also that there's actually the thesis is kind of 2 sentences. We don't have to pack it all into 1 sentence, and we know that this idea of poetic inspiration is going to drive what the poem's
Yeah,
what
to
the
build on
passage is all
that,
about.
students, sometimes when you try to come up with a lengthy thesis statement, sometimes you sacrifice your grammatical accuracy. So I really like that idea, Mr. Giles. If you're having trouble with the grammar, break it into 2 sentences. There's no law that says you can't have 2 sentences as a thesis.
Yeah, great. So now our first body paragraph, we see that the writer is talking about the title of the poem, connecting that main topic, but also connecting it to the whole extended metaphor, which again is part of the figurative language.
Yeah, and for me, Mr. Giles, I really noticed the orange that's lit up throughout this paragraph. The student's not talking about the poem itself. They're talking about how Bob Orr, the poet, is using language and ideas to push forward his message. And that's really important. I think you're not talking about the poem.
Yeah, and I like the idea of writing about titles of poems. I think it's an easy first body paragraph, and again, the writer does a good job of connecting to the guiding question in that final sentence. That's really smart. Then we see the next body paragraph. We see that the writer is now talking about the sort of beginning of the poem and the allusion to the repetitive nature of writing. This is that motif of writing from the outline.
Yeah, and for me, that textual reference in blue, just waiting for the tire shop man to show up, it really does show that anticipation. There's not a lot going on for the speaker in this point. He's really looking for some inspiration, and luckily the tire shop man is on the way.
Yeah, and we see again that attention to craft with the words that are highlighted in yellow. We see the ambiguity of the pronoun it. I think that's interesting, and I think that's a good sort of nuance connecting to an idea.
A very clever move the writers made at the end in that concluding sentence. They've put perhaps figuratively, and if you notice the gray highlight, figurative. Again, figurative language was part of the guiding question, and this writer has skillfully inserted that in the concluding sentence to maintain that focus.
Yeah, we're going to look at one more body paragraph just briefly, and then we're again look at the tire shop man and his behavior. And again, remember that it's that connection to the tire shop man that's a part of the guiding question. So that's really smart in the topic sentence. We have the topic, but also the connection to the guiding question. Interesting comments about cigarettes and coffee being symbolic of the morning ritual. I think that's a really astute, subtle observation. I think that's really a nice touch.
I agree. As we progress through the paragraph, we see the words simile, visual imagery, extended metaphor, and metaphor linking up again with the gray figurative language in the concluding sentence. I know I'm reiterating this, but Mr. Giles, this student is incredibly focused on the guiding question. This student understands the expectations of the question, and they are delivering the goods.
So you can read the rest of the text, because I think there's some really interesting things towards the end of this particular piece where they talk about the sort of rich imagery that's being described at the end of the poem that's quite powerful, as well as that final mention about inspiration. But we see that I think the student is really in command of the text. Why do we like this poem? This particular piece of writing, and why do we think it would score quite highly?
Well, I think it really goes back to those rubric points, Mr. Giles, that we talked about when we unpacked the criteria. I do see insightful and convincing analysis. I see a range of poetic features being discussed, and I see the effect on the reader. I see this relationship between the poet and the audience, and I just feel like these poetic terms are really explained well, and then they link to criterion A and do what, Mr. Giles?
But that talk about the implications and the subtleties, and I think the sort of subtle details that are inherent that you see in the writing, and just picking up on those subtle details shows a very sophisticated understanding of the poem.
For criterion C, there's no question as to whether or not the student is focused on the guiding question. They've embedded these key words throughout topic, including sentences. This is a very unified paper. I could just draw a line right down the paper.
Yeah, and it's ambitious, I think, trying to write that many paragraphs in a short amount of time, but I think the way the student's going about it is very understandable, and you can really see their structure.
Yeah. In the end, I don't think the number of points matter, but we believe this is some shade of 7.
Yeah, and exactly, and I think we don't even care that it's a 7, to be honest. We just think it's really strong writing, and it's really, you can see the student really showing that just strong critical thinking that we hope that we're all striving for, regardless of what numbers we get on a rubric, that we're thinking about just being thinkers and appreciating this literary craft.
That's great, Mr. Jaws. It's not always the number, it's the quality, the effort that you put into it, and you take what you get in the end, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, folks, we hope this video has been enjoyable for you. We hope that we've shown you lit students a good sample paper, one that deals with poetry. Notice how the paper is lit with our highlighting protocol, and we hope that you continue watching these videos.
Yeah, check out the files and the links because I think those are really useful. And it's been great chatting with you guys. Let us know what more you want to hear about and different topics, because we're always asking our students about different topics for videos. So let us know in the comments about what you'd like to see, and who knows, maybe it'll show up in the next week's feed.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.